I don't remember who it was, but on last week's meeting recording on YouTube, somebody had written something along the lines of, you say there's no self, and then you just talk about self for an hour. And I couldn't argue with it, obviously, but there's good reason. There's nothing to be said about this. So, well, this is as it is. And you don't know how it is, why it is, what it is, but it is as it is. So that's the end of speaking about this. And then I talk about self for an hour. So this as it is isn't different for a self than it is for a no self, because of course there isn't a no self. That would need a self to be a no self. There's simply no knowing. The whole illusion is that I know I am, and therefore I am separate. That's what I am. I'm separate being from the rest of being. Everything else is not me. You're not me. That's not me. I am me. Trapped inside, separate, apart, a tiny, insignificant part of this wild, dangerous, unknowable universe. No wonder I feel scared all the time. And to assuage the fear that self inevitably feels, remember this self was a tiny little 2-3-year-old self in a world of giants. Most selves still feel that way. That little child, separate, tiny self, so vulnerable and trapped, imprisoned, at the mercy of all the giant people, all the big selves, all the powerful selves. And so a lot of selves develop a grandiosity. So that I don't feel so powerless. I need power. And I compete with all the other selves to feel, well, to try and not feel the inherent powerlessness. There are no selves. There are no powerful selves. There are no powerless selves. But it is a very powerful illusion that I can do something about it. And of course, then what can happen is once you've exhausted the trying to be more powerful, to be a better self, to be the best self I could be, then of course, then there could be the allure, the attraction of escaping, of getting out of jail, of being free. This promise of freedom is massively attractive to the one who feels inside. So there's some good news and some bad news on that. And they're both the same. There's no one to be free. The prison cell was always empty. There was never anyone inside who could escape to freedom. And that's not the freedom that you've been seeking. That's not the freedom that I sought. I sought to be free, and I will know it when I am free. No. It's pure fantasy. And it can't be realized. This can't be realized. It's the only reality. This is as real as it gets. All dreams of escape, all dreams of freedom are pure fantasy. Where would you go? Where would you escape to? So the good news, the incredibly amazing, astonishing news is that there's only freedom. But it's not for you or me. No one's achieved it. No one's attained it. There is nothing to be attained. It's not what you dreamt of. This is all already just as it is. Spectacularly ordinary. Outrageously nothing to do with whatever you've imagined this might be. Nothing to do with possibility. This isn't a possibility. This is. There's nowhere for you to go. There's nothing to be learned. And even more incredibly, there's nothing to be lost. I don't know about you, but really, all I was ever fantasizing was the absence of myself. That's for so many years that I would recognize when I'm not here. It's a terrible joke. This is not a recognition. We don't have a word for what we're speaking of because there really isn't an absence. So, because you would have had to have been there in the first place to be absent. So there is no recognition of absence. And there's no greater joke than if you do happen to be absent, you won't notice. Of course, you won't be there to notice. This is never noticed. There's nothing to notice. There isn't a noticer and what's being noticed. There isn't an observer. There isn't a witness. There isn't a seer. You can't fucking say what there is. Somebody said the other day, netty, netty, net is all very well, but what is there? It's all very negating what isn't, but what are you left with? So you end up saying shit like you're left with not knowing, but that sounds like you know that you don't know, and that's not what's being suggested at all. Knowing is just empty. So that knowing is exactly the same as what you might call my knowing. Knowledge isn't negated. It's just really obviously just words, just ideas. And all we have are ideas, whether we just share them in thought with what we call ourselves. So you have a conversation and with all these different selves, and or you try and speak to other human beings about not knowing. It can only sound like not knowing is known. But do you really know the difference between knowing and not knowing? Do you really know what you know? Do you know that you know? Do you know that you don't know? And it can be outrageously undeniable that, no, of course you don't. I don't know. No. So you end up quite clueless. And clueless can be really frightening. What the fuck am I going to do now? I used to have a clue about what the hell was going on. Now I have no idea. Well, I do have ideas. I only have ideas. But I don't doubt that they're only ideas. I don't fucking know. Now that's the truth. And I don't doubt that that is the truth for every human being. But don't go around telling most human beings that they haven't got a clue what they know, and whatever they do say they know is empty, because self gets very touchy about that. And it isn't spectacular, not knowing. But it is liberating. It's a sort kind of, it's a very stark honesty. You don't know. And maybe the most liberating is you won't want to ask anyone else, because you won't doubt for one moment that they have more knowledge or understanding of this than anyone else. They just simply have a conviction that they do. And so the freedom is that there's no escape. I mean, it's just wonderfully paradoxical. The freedom is that there is no one to escape. There is no one to be free, to be liberated. It's best you don't pretend, not that you've got a choice, but it's best you don't pretend that that's what you want, because self would never want to not be free. I want more and more freedom for myself, and there is no freedom for yourself. So this is not what you want. This is not what you've longed for. How could it be? What you've always longed for has always been something else. Why on earth would you long for it if it was this? This is what you've said you don't want. Well, it's not fucking helped, has it? Because this is always just as it is. And there is no escape from this. And paradoxically, that's liberating. And there's a piece in it that doesn't make any sense. There's an okayness with life as it is that I wouldn't have believed. And I don't mean that life is always great. I don't mean that it's always at peace. I don't mean that it's always okay. It's just simply that it's very undeniable that it couldn't be other. And life couldn't be other than it is because it is as it is. And it's a full stop. All debate, all discussion about how life could be otherwise is seen for what it is, which is just fantasy and hypothesizing about some nirvana when there isn't anywhere else. It does leave you with nowhere to go. And that's the other reason I would say that this is not what you want. Because self always needs somewhere to go. I'm always in the next project, the next plan. It's outrageously simple.